Broadcasting. Okay. Whenever you're ready to start, I think we've got 140 participants in the room, and I think we're ready to go.
Thank you, Karen. Well, hello, everyone. I was going to say good afternoon, but for some of you, I understand it could be good evening or good morning. So welcome. I'm Kimberly Yannick. I'm with the Center for Social Behavioral Support at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nicholas, and I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Diggs. I'm also at Old Dominion University, and I work as a Virginia Tiered Systems of Support systems coach, supporting divisions across the state of Virginia.
And I work with the Center on PBIS, primarily with the Mid-Atlantic region, but occasionally elsewhere. So thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about something that Nick and I are both very passionate about, coaching, specifically our coaching practice. And so just a couple of quick housekeeping before we get started. And as people join, just to remind you of the forum expectations there. We will address some of these throughout our time together. If you're here, you've got that one down. I think most of us are learning to navigate this session. If you run into little hiccups, please let us know, and we have folks who are here to support us through that. Nick and I will be using the chat and the polls and the Q&A. And if you're in Pathables, if you haven't discovered already, right where you're chatting, many of you are chatting to us. You could also click on polls when we direct you for that. And then at the end, if you want to submit questions, we'll also do that in the polls section for Q&A. Okay. So again, I don't know what time of day it is or where you are in your day. You could be in a food coma from lunch. You could be in an afternoon lull. You could be just, early in the morning. So Nick and I find it important to be mindful and to practice wellness for ourselves. So we're going to invite you just to take a moment and practice some deep breathing, which if that's new to you, if you place your hands at the bottom of your ribs around your stomach, Deep breathing looks and feels like when you inhale, your stomach should extend and you inhale through your nose. And if you're feeling low energy, I would exhale through your nose to keep that heat inside. But if you're stressed out and you need to release, you're going to take a deep exhale through the mouth. So take a moment and move with the heart. You breathe in, hold it at the top for a minute. Make sure your exhale is a little bit longer than that inhale. I'll give you one to do by yourself. All right, so I do see some technical issues in the chat box with audio, and so I'm going to ask our colleagues who are there to support to help us with that. So when I was asked to do this session on coaching, I thought about how this might look and sound, and I put together a vision, and the first person I thought of was Nick. Nick and I have been working together for maybe 10 plus years. I'm not sure, Nick, it's been a while now. And he's just one of those people you meet in your journey who stands out as exceptional. And so I was kind of nervous about presenting my vision to him because I wanted to include wellness and starting with ourselves as part of our coaching process and then really building this. And I sent it to him and waited nervously, and he graciously agreed and said, yes, this is part of my practice as well. I could, see his brilliance when he showed up and we were working together, but I didn't know what his preparation was. So I was glad to hear that we had similar practices. And then the hard part came. People ask us, how do you do the coaching? How do you operationally define that? And Patty, my colleague, who's also on the call helping us, we actually had to do that. And we were stumped a little bit, like, what does this look like and sound like? And so Nick and I spent a lot of time together trying to operationally define what were the learning intentions for our brief time together. And so we want to explore with you wellness as the foundation of our coaching practice. And we're going to use the language coaching for change, which we'll come back to in a moment. We want to explore processes to build fluency with both content and processes that support our coaching for change practice. And we know we need to be intentional from day one with what we're doing if we're going to build capacity and fluency and sustainability. So we want to explore with you intentionality as that driver to move us from this coaching as a noun to coaching as a verb. Think of it as building a culture of coaching in terms of our scaling efforts. So those are our learning intentions for today. And if you had a chance to click on files where the chat is, it's the last option there. There are some resources, including the presentation, and there is a note taker that has prompts that you might jot down some notes for yourself. We know that many of you are joining from a team, so it may be that you're thinking about what might you do for yourself and what might you take back to the rest of your team to explore this notion of coaching. So it's called Supporting My Coach's Practice, and you can download that. It's in a Word doc and use that for our time together today. So we want to start with make sure that we have some shared language for our time together. I think I can speak for both Nick and I to say that we have pulled from different literature-based, research-based to develop our coaching practice over time. And I will say it's a work in progress. We're always learning. And so we have pulled from, instructional coaching around content and process, lots of expertise out there, thinking Jim Knight, Kais, Lindsay, Garmston and Wellman, Ranke, Killian. So we wanted to have some shared language, knowing that those of you joining us are probably like us, a bit scattered throughout this coaching process. Nick and I both coach at state, district, and school and individual level. So we wanted to use the language coaching for change today as our anchor to have some shared language, because for us, no matter what we do, we're coaching for change. And so what we know about coaching for change is that, and I love how George spoke to much of this today with his keynote as well, it involves and asks us to be very adaptive and responsive to that culture, climate, and context of the organization, the individual, etc., with whom we're coaching. And so that's one of the reasons Nick and I thought it was so important to include wellness, because it takes a lot of preparation for us to show up and do this work, be grounded so that we can be adaptive and responsive to the organization, the culture, climate, and context. And so Nick's gonna start us off in this work around wellness, focusing on ourselves first.
Yeah, and so thank you, Kim. I think one of the points that you just brought up that's really important for us to consider as we think about wellness as kind of the foundation to our coaching practice is the way in which we show up. And we know that when we coach, it requires that we're knowledgeable about the content, that we have a plan and a process to support our coaching efforts and the effectiveness and efficiency of those efforts. But really our individual capacity to execute those plans depends a lot on us being present as our best selves. And so focusing on our wellness, I found in my personal practice, and Kim has in hers, is a way for us to really kind of maximize the benefits and impact of our coaching relationships. And so making sure that we're present in the fullest way possible is really important. And so one of the things that I think is really helpful as we begin to think about and consider wellness and the way that that impacts our coaching is to really take a look at what our current reality looks like around some of our own individual wellness practices. So, all right, there we go. All right, and so again, like I said, as with any coaching work, I think one of the first things to really do is take stock of whatever your current reality is and the context in which we're operating or coaching. I find this to be especially true for me, particularly probably like a lot of you all right now, that my personal and professional reality has shifted considerably over the last year. Our context has changed. And so that's caused me again to kind of reflect and think about where am I and how does that impact my coaching practices, but also those wellness practices that are associated as kind of the foundation for the way in which I show up when I'm there to support my divisions, my schools, or individual coachees that I'm working with and supporting through a coaching process. And so one of the things that we want to look at is give you an opportunity to engage in a couple of polls. And so we're going to begin that in just a second. And like Kim shared with you earlier, that poll tab is there in your Pathable besides the chat. And so that will be the resource that you can use to respond to each of these polls. All right, and so the first scenario that I want us to kind of consider, and really what I would like you to do is select the example that kind of most resonates with you or resembles or reflects your current reality. And so A, I limit the number of non-classroom Zoom meetings to 3 per day. B, my Zoom meetings start with, what number is this for everyone today? Or C, I find myself having more meetings during the day working remotely than I did when I was in person. I'm going to give everyone kind of a minute. Go ahead and respond. All right, and so it looks like an overwhelming majority of people said that C, that finding themselves having more meetings during the day working remotely than they did when they were in person is kind of where your current reality is at. I can definitely relate to that. As a coach that used to travel kind of across the state to support people, that time in between was part of my own kind of wellness time to recenter, reflect on my current practice. And that's had to shift as now it's simply hopping from one Zoom meeting into the next. All right. So the next kind of poll or reality that I'd like you to consider is, what does your planning and collaboration look like? So A, I find myself able to include planning time for myself and collaboration with others during the workday. Or B, I find myself having to extend my work schedule to accommodate individual planning time and collaboration with others. All right, and so again, it looks like for about 2/3 of us, our current reality is that we've extended our day. So we find ourselves engaging in more meetings than we did prior to probably March or so. And we also find ourselves currently extending our workday, whether that means that we're moving other work to later on in the day to accommodate meetings that are occurring during normal work hours, or if we're meeting with people outside of normal work hours in order to get all the other tasks that we've kind of set up, accomplished during the course of the day. All right, and I've got one more element of our current reality that I'd like us to take a minute to pause and kind of reflect on. And this really goes back to what you do for yourself. So A, I plan for me time daily and I do not cancel this time with myself. B, I schedule daily time for movement. C, I find that my morning wellness routines are often interrupted or unfinished. So you may be beginning them, but then something comes up and you tend to drift away from completing them. D, I start my day with social media, email, or the news. And E, I create and commit to a morning ritual that provides space for ourselves to start our day in a way that is aligned with our joy. All right, so this one looks right now like it's a little bit more spread out, but D does seem about a little bit less than half of us find that we tend to start our day with social media, email, or the news. And again, thinking about the fact that wellness is a very personal or individual thing, that may be something that for some of us gives us kind of energy to start our day, helps us feel informed, or that it's a productive way to begin the day. For others of us, though, that might be a draining practice, right? And it may be that those are sources of stress for us to begin the day. And so considering that and thinking about that and how that plays into your wellness, what I'd like to invite us all to do is to take a moment to think about your responses to those three particular questions and the way in which they reflect on your current reality at the moment. Where did you notice inconsistencies that exist between your current reality, the practices kind of as defined within those prompts, and what you would consider to be your priorities or the things that you value around wellness? So for instance, like I said, for me, I really value the idea that setting aside time to run is a big part of what I value, is that idea that I have time to engage in movement on a daily basis. I know that in my current practice, it is one of the things that tends to get bumped or pushed off of my priority list. Now that school has started back for my kids, getting them set up with their meetings in the morning for their classes and that type of thing take priority before I begin my workday. And so are there places for you where there's inconsistencies between your current reality and kind of the things that you value, and just take literally a minute on that coaching practice worksheet that we've provided for you all to kind of go ahead and jot some reflections or things that you've noticed as we went through that first activity. All right, I'm gonna give everyone about 10 seconds to kind of wrap up the thought. Then I'm gonna go ahead and turn things back over to Kim to kind of dig a little bit more into how we prioritize wellness.
Thank you, Nick. Nick and I went back and forth on a lot of things putting this together, and we feel very strongly that language matters. And so we started to pair wellness and self-care together. What we find is sometimes self-care can elicit selfish feelings, like I'm being selfish if I do this for myself. So we want you to insert whichever word works for you. And I will say for myself, it's a commitment every day when I wake up, like Nick's talking about. Sometimes the Zoom meetings start at 7 o'clock my time and they don't stop. And so I wake up with mindfulness. I've got to commit to wellness, self-care, whatever language works for you, so that I can show up grounded, centered. I can use the interpersonal coaching skills that I know are effective, but if I'm not centered and grounded, sorry, Patty, she's a cat person, you know, I might show up in a different way, not necessarily in that best space that Nick talked about that allows me to do this work so well. And so we want to take a moment and talk about, you know, why it's so critical. Nick just talked about the shift in his personal and professional life, and I think we can all relate to that. And when we think about stress in the workplace, I know years ago, it used to be that there would be this ranking by profession, like which, you know, professions do we find the most stress in the workplace? And I remember one of them was actually principals of schools, and the amount of heart disease that was showing up in that profession. But now when I started looking and Nick and I started exploring the research, that's just not true because it's across professions. And what we want to stress to us is that just like with the exercise we just did, many of you said, oh, I start off with social media every morning. And as Nick said, some of us that's stressful for, it starts us in a different space. For others, that energizes us. So it's this stress is a highly personalized phenomenon. And it's important for us to be mindful of that as coachings because what's stressful for us may not be stressful for the folks that we're working with, et cetera. And so really that degree of job stress depends on two things. And I found this to be fascinating and meaningful, especially in this current reality. And that is when you have that magnitude of demands that are being asked of individuals, coupled with the degree or sense of control that an individual has in dealing with them, that is a big indicator of workplace stress. So I think about what we're asking teachers and principals and district and state, all educators, mental health providers to do right now. And I think it's critical to be mindful that these two things, when we're coaching, you know, what's that balance of my coaching? And if I move into consultation, what's the balance of demands, if you will? And really being mindful of that, because what we know is, if we're not mindful of those things and don't set up that space to make these things happen, there are negative implications for that practice for all of us. And we already have, you know, it's hard to keep educators going in this work. So as a coach, we have some sphere of influence here in our work with this. And so as Nick said, you know, it's kind of ubiquitous. It follows us everywhere. One day something might be stressful to us. Another day it might not be stressful to us. But what I was so excited about, the recommendation from other experts, is that looking at prevention as this healthcare approach, like what can we do to normalize wellness, to, you know, not equate self-care with selfish, and start to be more preventative in that, instead of responding the way we may traditionally do with more intense interventions for ourselves, if you will. And so we, you know, Patty reminds me all the time, she's so good about skills. And, you know, what does it look like and sound like? And Nick and I, we struggled with this too, and we had to really reflect on this for ourselves. What does our best self look like, sound like, feel like when we're coaching for change? And so we just listed a few things that we landed on, but we want you to take a moment to identify for yourself what's important for you, be it from this list or some other. I know for me, grounded is my most important thing. If I can be grounded and show up, then I'm able to be more empathetic. I'm able to be more mindful. But I think identifying it for yourself is critical, because then you can then start to think about, well, what is it that I need to do? What are the skills? What are the practices, the routines, the rituals that I need to do so that I can show up grounded, mindful, empathetic? And so we're just using these buckets today, mind, body, spirit, as wellness buckets. There are others, and please insert whatever language works for you. But we actually went through, well, what's a bucket filler for you, Nick? And we talked back and forth, and we populated this with just some examples. And I think, Nick, what we discovered, it's not one bucket. It really is the intersection of all these buckets. You know, Nick talked about his runs, and he does all these great hikes. So he gets like two things with one because he's surrounded by nature, which nourishes him, and he gets that movement. And I was just so in awe, like discovering his wellness practices. So we want you to take a quick moment and on your note taker, and or if you want to put one word or a couple words for what are your bucket fillers, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll just pause for a moment and give you the opportunity to share so we can learn what works for other people, and maybe we'll try some new things for ourselves. Walking in the woods, weightlifting, baking, music. Oh, Erica, playing with my puppy. I love it. These are fantastic. Oh, Linda, spending time with horses. Great. So I love that you're all quickly able, yes, I know exactly what at least one of my bucket fillers is. So it's important for us to, be mindful, make it a priority, and commit to that every day so that we can show up as our best selves to do this work. So we want to think about, coaching is always with self, starting with self. How do I take care of my wellness? How do I, the other two learning intentions for this time together, build fluency with process and content? Think about how I'm building capacity. So we want to think about how do we take this notion of wellness, the things that we're identifying for ourselves, knowing that that is a personal indicator for all of us. And how do we begin to normalize wellness routines in our work? And why would that be important? And for those of you who have, studied Catherine Bradshaw's research, it's always phenomenal. And one of the things that she found is that there's really a positive impact to doing this. When we prioritize staff wellness, we see all of these positive outcomes, shared commitment to student success. And for me, that means commitment and collaboration and partnership. We have increased positive reactions, which very much aligns with the practices that we might prioritize in our work. And we also see the opposite. So when we don't prioritize wellness and thinking about workplace stress, there are lots of negative outcomes for that. So, George talked about the importance of climate and culture. And one of those data points that we want to look at, how do teachers and students feel about the teaching and learning experience? So we want to talk about that a bit more. And Nick he does such a great job of talking about how they're really starting to align and infuse things.
Yeah, and so I think one of the places where the idea of supporting wellness and normalizing it as part of our practice really shows up in our coaching, because Kim, you and I had some conversations about, well, when we go out, are we really being asked to coach around wellness at all? Or is it that that's just part of kind of what we embed into our practice and support for coaching? And as I began to kind of reflect on that question, one of the things that really came to mind for me was that actually wellness has come to the forefront in a lot of the work that I'm doing to support individual coaches, division leadership teams, and school teams, particularly as it relates to some of our work around equity and addressing vulnerable decision points. And so Danziger's work talks about factors such as fatigue, hunger, and the way in which they can impact our decision-making and create those vulnerable decision points that lead to some inequitable outcomes, or some of those implicit biases kind of showing up in the way in which we outwardly act. And then Kent McIntosh really talks about the fact that it's not really related to the students at all, but it's about what state are we in, right? Where are we internally when we are encountering those different situations that arise? And so a lot of the work that I'm doing with school teams and division teams is around how do we, number one, empower practitioners with the skills and abilities to kind of be more self-aware of where they are in the moment, give them routines to help center them or ground them, Kim, as you talked about, right? And to manage the stress that they're dealing with so that they can be in a better space and place to make better decisions and support their students in a more equitable way that produces better outcomes. We've done trainings around things that incorporate mindfulness exercises, calming strategies, breathing routines like the one that we practiced earlier in the session today. I've worked with teams that have built fitness groups at their schools as part of how to kind of engage their staff as a whole, and some of those movement-based or body responsive processes for increasing wellness. Another example that I really tend to think about a lot with this is how do we use our data to inform when we might want to engage in some of these wellness practices. When I was a building level coach, one of the things that we looked at in our data was kind of trend data over the course of multiple years. And we noticed that March was always the time that was both high in referrals and high for disproportionality in some of the referrals that we were getting, particularly around race and gender. And there's lots of reasons for that. We've gone through this long period of time where there's lots of breaks during kind of the winter season of January and February. We've got this long month of March, and it's also the period of time right before a lot of our standardized testing would occur. And so that added stress becoming a factor in what was going on. And so one of the initiatives that we started at the school was March Gladness. And the idea behind March Gladness was to incorporate things like coverage breaks, to give teachers more time to kind of reset or ground or center themselves, increased acknowledgements and affirmations as a way to kind of build in a lot more of that positive culture, snacks being provided that were healthy, both at meetings and just kind of randomly throughout the day, again, to address some of those physiological needs and put people in a better space and place so that they would be able to, again, better interact with their students. And this is a place where kind of those wellness practices begin to come to life and kind of be normalized within our routines and supporting better actual data-driven outcomes in the building. You're muted, Kim.
Oh, it's off and running, Nick. Okay, thank you for that. Call that a positive nudge in coaching. We wanted to just share a couple of practical ways because, you know, George reminded us this morning that we want to think about how do we think, behave, and allocate resources to be more efficiently? And so, as Nick said, we may not be coaching around wellness specifically, but how are we normalizing it in routines and the work that we're already doing? And so we're just going to offer a couple quick examples just for the remainder of this little piece on this learning intention. And so one of the things we've started to do is add wellness checks to every single team meeting. And so this is the team initiated problem solving forum, which both Nick and I use quite a bit. And we've added standing agenda items now to check in with folks. And it can be fun. It can be, you know, post a song that describes how you're feeling today. What's the most positive thing you saw last week? What's the most act of generosity that you observed today? But just to get people to check in, I've seen some things like this. I'm not sure what red means there with that face, but it looks like we might need to pause and do some one-on-one coaching, but you get the idea. We build some things into our routines to start normalizing that. We use expectations. Brian did such a lovely job of speaking to how we pivoted using our teaching matrix as a way to define expectations for ourselves in this new reality. And so we've started to infuse wellness practices, social emotional skills. When you break down empathy, I tend to use Brene Brown's work a lot, and she breaks that into 4 skill sets. And we've started infusing that into matrices. So here's an example, creating awareness of your stress level. The expectations for our forum talks about checking this for yourself to be safe, right? But this is something, it's already part of our way of work, and now we're just infusing this into it. Thinking about the school-wide teaching matrix. For example, many years ago, I worked with a coach at an elementary school, and I sat outside of her office and took data. And what I observed is kind of this revolving door with the school counselor. And at the end of the day, she never came out. And I said, "What are you doing in there?" And she says, "Well, our kids don't have, self-regulation. They don't know how to respond when they're upset. They don't have those skill sets." And I said, "Well, let's look at the data to see, what percentage of students are experiencing this." And it was a large number of students. So we pushed it down into tier 1 and put it on the school-wide matrix, exactly what she was doing in those individual sessions. And this helps teachers too, because, you know, it reminds all of us when I get upset and you know, and we've got a lot coming at us as educators, what do I do? Over the summer, school teams that Nick and I have worked with have started adding wellness, both for the virtual and the in-person experience. Like, how do we just start to normalize this? Yes, of course, we're going to talk about wellness. A lot of schools have talked about their dailies. Schools book in their dailies. You can book in team meetings if you're coaching, but just some ideas there around what you might do to start and end the day. If your data says that there are particular times of the week or the day, I was looking at Swiss data yesterday with a school, and for whatever reason, Monday at 8 o'clock was a sweet spot. And so we had to do some bookends, and we thought at 9 o'clock we would incorporate a school-wide pause, or we might do some of that belly breathing for teachers and students. Lots of folks are using music. I saw most of you, or many of you, reflect that as part of your wellness practices with both students and adults. Nick, I think this was one of the schools that you worked with.
Yes, so it's actually a division-wide initiative in one of the divisions that I support. And so they had been engaging all of last year, really focusing on SEL efforts for their students. And then as things began to shift kind of over March, April, and May, they spent a lot of time kind of pausing and doing some surveying of their staff and families to find out what their needs were as well. And through that and a lot of the feedback that their coaches were getting when they were supporting their school level teams was that stress levels amongst the staff were really high, and that the staff were really struggling with how to support the students with their social emotional needs and getting those met. And so one of the things that they decided to embark on and engage in to address that for this school year was to kind of normalize wellness, but also to equip, again, their staff with some wellness routines and skills that they could actually use in a really practical way. And so they developed these Wellness Wednesdays. And so every Wednesday, they kind of highlight a set of wellness practices or routines that can be utilized. There's a theme to each week's Wellness Wednesday. And so it just gives teachers really practical ways to engage in wellness activities on a weekly basis in a really chunkable one-page flyer type of way with videos and links to support those practices.
And I love that that's a district-wide initiative that would illustrate what George offered us to be more efficient, intentional with our resources. And just thinking, since wellness is a personal thing, you know, as you're coaching at a district level, at state level, at a school level, you know, are there things that you can set up that will, that you can ask people what brings wellness, you know, what are your bucket fillers, and set those things up. So we just put a few quick resources there on things that we've been using with schools and districts that might meet all of those needs. But yeah, I love the community partner approach as well. It's a great way to engage and wrap the community around the education system and give people a platform to give and to be part of the school, the education system. So that's one of my favorites that I'm seeing, these little pop-ups where the, you know, people offer these things for free for educators. So take a quick pause and think about, what will you do? Remember, wellness is an ongoing commitment, not just for ourselves, but to really make time for others as well. We all have a lot to do. It's hard to sometimes say, oh, but we've got so much to do. What is one thing you can record on your note taker that you can commit to support, you know, taking your wellness practice and also normalizing that for the people that you are engaged in coaching with? Okay, so Nick's going to lead us in this next learning intention, and we really tried to take a concrete practitioner-focused approach to this, knowing that we've pulled from the research and literature around best practices. So I'm going to do a really good job, Nick, advancing.
Thank you, Kim. So what we really want to focus on next is how do we incorporate a process to both build fluency with content, and also what processes can we use to support our coaching around change, right? And so what does that actually look like in practice and in reality? All right. And so Kim spoke a little bit earlier to some of the research that Catherine Bradshaw has done, as well as some of the research that's been done by Amanda March, Brian Gant, and others. But one of the things that really comes out of a lot of that research around coaching is that we have to allow time for those coaching relationships to be built and to be strengthened, and that is a critical piece to any of the work that we want to do in moving forward around skill acquisition or the installation of any practices. And so it's imperative that we allow that time to both build trust, to create buy-in, and to establish those collaborative partnerships in the way in which we work. I think that oftentimes in education, what we tend to kind of want to do is default to this position of hurry up and kind of check things off of our to-do list because there's so many demands that are on that to-do list that we have. But that relationships and trust are things that we can't just treat as to-do list check off types of items. The other thing that I think is really true, and I want us to all kind of take a moment and pause with, is that coaching relationships are just like any other relationship, and that the establishing of trust or that collaborative way of operating and that dynamic within our relationships is not a one-time thing. So it's not something that we can establish at the beginning and say, yep, we built this great trust between all the members of this particular coaching relationship, and now we're ready to move on and we can just engage in implementation work from here until the end of time. I think that it's important that we set up routines that allow us to kind of on an ongoing basis intentionally assess where we are and what the needs are as it relates to trust and levels of buy-in. Sometimes there's shifts in the type of practice that we're asking people to engage in that require a bit more trust. Sometimes the external context around us shifts in a way that requires there to be a greater trust built or established because the type of sharing that is needed or the reliance or dependence on one another increases based on those demands. I think we're currently living in one of those times, right? Where the things that coaches may need to be able to communicate in terms of need shifts a little bit and requires a deeper level of trust than what may have been required in order to engage in and support some of the implementation work that you might have been engaged in last September or October as that school year started. All right. And so as we begin to think about how does this play out in terms of self-care and wellness being a foundation for the way in which we operate, we really want to think about where does this all fit into an iterative process. And so I really tend to think about this kind of in three areas. And again, it's iterative, so there's not really a starting or ending point to this cycle, but how do we assess our current reality? You know, who are we coaching and supporting? What is it that they need coaching and support around? Are they ready? What does that look like? How do we determine the readiness of individuals or systems, as George talked about earlier today, to be ready to engage in change when we're coaching for change? How do we assess ourselves as part of that process? What are our wellness commitments or needs in order to be able to show up as our best self and be a part of that process? What does that look like in terms of the content and knowledge we need to kind of either acquire or refresh ourselves on or deepen? And then how do we plan for intentionality to support both wellness for ourselves and others and their growth in terms of content and the acquisition of a process? So what I'd like to do is to have everyone kind of reflect for a second in the chat box as to which one of these three areas do you see yourself kind of strongest in your current personal coaching practice. So in your current coaching practice, which one of those areas do you feel is your strongest? Let's see a couple ones, a couple of threes. All right. There are a few twos in there, lots of ones and threes. it's looking like right now. And I think that that makes a lot of sense with the way in which I know I personally tend to be oriented, and I think a lot of coaches are oriented, is that we tend to think about assessing that current reality and what is the big picture and the context in which we're going to operate and coach. And then we want to jump right to planning, right? So how are we going to coach? How are we going to get there? How are we going to support others? And sometimes it's that second step there, that self-assessment of our wellness, our personal growth, the areas that we need to deepen our own knowledge in, that becomes something that we want to spend a little bit more time reflecting on. So what do each of these kind of areas or key elements look like in practice? So I want to spend a little bit of time digging a little bit deeper into how we might go about assessing the current reality. First, thinking about potentially engaging in, as part of our process, a listening interview or tour, and really focusing on listening to understand. So what is it that we're really trying to find out about the current context or situation in which we're supporting people and those that we're supporting? So who is it that needs to be supported? Who are they? What is the context in which we're coaching? What are the big goals or outcomes that are desired from those that we're going to support through coaching? So can we define what those outcomes are that we're hoping to achieve over time? And then thinking about, what do I need to do to prepare in order to support those efforts? All right, so when we think about listening in those interview tours, one of the things that really jumps out here are those interpersonal communication skills, right? Do we have the skills and abilities to listen actively and attentively? Are we using our coaching kind of tools, right, of being able to paraphrase? Are we using coaching questions and stems? Are we summarizing to make sure that what we are hearing is actually what is attempted to be communicated by those that we're going to be supporting in the future? And are we practicing empathy? Kim talked a lot earlier about needing to be grounded in order to be empathetic. And I think that that's a critical part of how we show up as coaches, is being able to perspective take for those that we're supporting in the work, staying out of the judgment zone, being able to clearly communicate with them and recognize their needs and emotions. This is one of the other places where I tend to gather a lot of information about the things that people might need that are not necessarily the things that they're articulating or communicating at the time. This is where wellness shows up as well, right? So when they're communicating around the levels of stress or the demands that they are personally feeling, or the demands on those that they are supporting and coaching, right? And so then thinking about, okay, so how do I incorporate and embed into our process ways to model for them what that might look like in order to equip them with some skills or routines that may help address some of those needs that are coming up. All right, so the second piece of assessing our current reality that I think is really important to think about is, how are we going to define the context? What are the data points that are going to tell us what the current needs and reality are within that division? What data is available to us? Are there naturally occurring data sources that we can look at? What's the story that that data tells? And then how do we engage stakeholders in hearing their authentic voice to know the story behind the data? Right? How does that become an additional part of the data that we're looking at, and the ways in which we begin to better understand the context in which we're going to be operating, both, and again, on scale, right? From the individual level to the larger systems level. And then additionally, is there other data that we need that we don't currently have that may be helpful in helping paint a clearer picture of what the needs are and the best way to go about supporting and addressing those needs? And so, again, there's lots of places and tools that exist that help with assessing some of that data and beginning to be able to define that context a little bit clearer. Some of those examples might include initiative maps like NERNs that kind of lay out for you, if you're supporting a division, what are their primary objectives and initiatives? What are the big things that are taking up a lot of their time, they're allocating a lot of their resources to, and what are the outcomes that are attached to that? Those are huge contextual indicators. Whether or not they are directly connected to the things that you are in there to coach and support directly, they're gonna have an impact on it, because all of these systems are definitely interconnected. Thinking about data audits. And so again, when thinking about data and data audits, I tend to think about it in two ways. The first is part of kind of that data infrastructure, which are what are the actual pieces of data that we have? How is it stored? Where is it stored? Who has access to the data when we want to engage in coaching for change, particularly around that problem solving and decision making, and what that looks like as a part of the process and who we need to support in being able to be involved in those efforts. But then also, how are we communicating and sharing that data? And data audits are a great way to get at that piece of kind of the data and the context in which we're operating as well. What's the culture around sharing data? Is there a culture of transparency, or is data something that's closely guarded? And if we're going to engage in coaching for change that's grounded in looking at concrete data as an objective measure, then are there some shifts that are going to need to take place there? And is that a process of change that we're going to have to support others through? Will that require more buy-in and trust, like we talked about kind of at the beginning of this section? And lastly, how do we look at classroom behavior systems? And so here's an example of a classroom management observation tool that we can use, again, to collect some of that data on what's going on at the classroom level. What practices is the educator currently engaging in? Are there things that they have strengths in right now? Are there areas that they could use a little bit more support in? And what would that look like? And how does that define the context both of what's occurring in that classroom, how we're going to coach around and support that, and how are we going to chart a course to move forward? All right, Kim, did you have anything to add?
I would just add, Nick, that we tried to give you resources depending on what your coaching context is. So all of those can be accessed with those links there, but it's just, you articulate it so well, Nick. Thank you.
All right, and so then there's really kind of, I guess, two more areas that I tend to think about. And this one is one that for me has been kind of a challenge to think about in terms of the process that's associated with it. And Kim and I spent a lot of time discussing how we assess the current reality around content knowledge that's needed. And so really thinking about, as a coach, what's the content knowledge that's needed? Are there things that you need to have a deep understanding of? When we're working with efforts like multi-tiered systems of support or PBIS, we tend to think a lot about and develop a deep knowledge of those systems change practices, of the frameworks that we're using, those tiered frameworks that we're using to support our efforts. But are there areas where the content specific to whatever that particular practice is in a particular classroom becomes critical for us to know? You know, are there other initiatives or efforts that are being aligned with the overall framework or being incorporated and embedded into it that we need to become more aware of to make sure that we're supporting teams in the best way possible when it comes to alignment? You know, is there available research or literature that we can reference to kind of support a deepening knowledge of our content understanding? Are there local experts that we can reach out to or partner with? You know, do we have coaching partners or PLCs that we can lean on and rely upon to help us grow and understand in our own personal understanding to support our coaching efforts? You know, one of these that jumps out to me is restorative practices. I know that I have several divisions across the state that really jumped on board early on and were early adopters of trying to integrate and implement restorative practices as part of their tiered framework. And for me, that meant that in order to have an understanding to be able to support them, I needed to hop on a plane and go spend a few days with some of the experts, getting trained and learning more about restorative practices and the systems around restorative practices and how they match and align with our multi-tiered framework. And so this particular table, that comes from a brief out of University of South Florida that really looks at coaching systems and how we consider content within coaching systems, I've found really helpful in organizing my thoughts around the way in which we organize and consider content when coaching, particularly when engaging in systems coaching for change. And so we've really kind of broken it down into three areas here. There's the side that really focuses on instruction and pedagogy. And so what are those things that are related specifically to those evidence-based practices? There's the side that focuses on some of those broader systems issues, things like organizational improvement and systems change. Again, multi-tiered systems of support, those district policies and procedures that are in place, in whatever the district, state, or school that you're supporting is. And then those things that tend to span across both domains, the effective teaming, the database problem solving and evaluation. And so that's an area that I find often, me personally, when it comes to systems change coaching, is the area that I know I really have to spend a lot of time both deepening my own content knowledge and supporting others in their understanding of, is how do they engage in that database problem solving? What does effective teaming look like? And how do we strengthen those practices as we go? So there are a couple of questions that I have here for you, and I believe we have polls for these, correct, Kim? All right.
Yes.
The first poll question that we have related to this item for you is really to take a minute to think about these three particular areas and which one do you see as your biggest strength when it comes to thinking about content and coaching? So it looks like a fairly even split, a little bit more heavily weighted towards one, but a fairly even split between 1 and 2. Right. And so I think coaches that tend to support coaching within a school tend to really be heavily weighted towards number 1 and have some of that content expertise. Again, external coaches like myself and Kim, I think we tend to lean more towards either 2 or 3 in terms of thinking kind of broader, bigger picture about those systems and the interconnectedness between instruction and the system overall. And then, so the second question that I have for you all to think about as a poll is, which content area do you find yourself most frequently needing to engage in additional learning to support your coaching efforts? And it may be the same and it may be completely different. So here it looks like most people, 3 is kind of the area where they're seeing the need to most frequently engage in additional learning. And I think that when you're talking about coaching for change, that makes a lot of sense, particularly because areas 1 and 2 either tend to be our natural area of expertise or the area in which we've done a lot of kind of coaching prep and content background knowledge building already. But that area 3, like I said before, particularly that top line there around effective teaming and the database problem solving and evaluation, is so critical to change work being successful. All right. All right. And so then the last item that I'd like for us to consider when we think about assessing the current reality is, what are the current processes, the structures and protocols that we have in place that are going to help get us to whatever our intended outcome is? Right? So when we think about those outcomes that we heard about, the goals that were expressed in those listening interviews that we engaged in at the beginning, when we considered the context and we identified particular action items that needed to be addressed and ways in which we had to navigate that, the structures that exist for us to navigate those, where are our opportunities to coach? Where are the tools and resources that we can use that will help facilitate us getting to those intended outcomes in a structured way? And so what might that look like? All right, and so as we think about planning for this process and getting to those intended outcomes and how we problem solve, we really want to think about, again, preparing with intentionality, right? Starting with the end in mind, where is it that we want to get to? How are we going to map out a step-by-step process in order to get to those outcomes, in order to reach our objectives at the end of the day? Do we have structured processes for meeting or problem solving that we're going to use, that we're sure will be used over time and sustained, whether we are present or not, right? So one of the things that we want to do with coaching for change is that we're always coaching for sustainability. We want to make sure that the things that we do are going to be durable and last over time. And so do we have a plan for that as a part of our process? And then lastly, are there structures to engage teams in some of those data-informed conversations? One that I guess about 15 years ago, Kim used to use with me and my school team all the time when I was a building level coach was the here's what, so what, now what, right? And she would constantly ask, so here's what, and we'd look at the data, and then we'd go through the so what, and then the now what. So where do we go from there? Kim, do you want to speak to this data discoveries process a little bit?
No, just that I really encourage you whenever you're going to engage with data. Yes, I use tips, and with tips, I do, as Nick said, what outcome do I need to get to? I never just give people data. I always have a structure, a protocol to guide that process to get to solution development. And this just happens to be my favorite, Nick. I still use it for everything. So.
I think it's really effective. And so a couple of the other tools, and so Kim just talked about tips. Here's a tips agenda. And a way, again, to embed wellness is to embed some of those wellness checks right there at the start of the agenda, right? How do we make that practice part of our process on an ongoing, regular basis? All right.
And I love the tips for shaping behavior, Nick. I find myself spending a lot of time coaching around problem solving. And for me, the tips structures the routine. So I absolutely love a structured process, and that happens to be my go-to.
Yeah. Kim, do you want to speak to the data mining protocol as well?
No, just an example. You can find structures and protocols, and most of them will tell you what is the outcome I'm trying to get to. Am I trying to build community? Am I trying to have solution development, collaboration, trust building? But that's what we mean by being intentional with what you discovered in assessing the current reality and choosing structures and protocols to help you coach a person, a team, an organization to that outcome. So those are just examples.
All right. And so one of the other things that I've found immensely helpful in my practice is using coaching service delivery plans. And so after kind of going through assessing the current reality, thinking about the context, listening to those that I'm going to be supporting through my coaching efforts, considering the processes and protocols that are going to be needed, is to be able to write that out into a concrete plan. And so this particular plan right here is the one from NERN. And their plan I love because, again, it allows us to kind of identify those targeted concepts or skills that we're going to be coaching around and develop that actual plan. When are we going to do it? How are we going to do it? And what are those effectiveness measures that are going to let us know at the end that we've achieved the goals and outcomes both that we have as a coach, and that they should help get us to the goals and outcomes that were articulated by the individual, the school or division that we're supporting in some of those initial conversations that we had. And then here's an example of the coaching plan that we use at VTSS. We've adapted the NERN coaching service delivery plan that you saw on the previous slide. And really one of the things that I appreciate about our adaptation on it is that we've included a couple of things, and Kim will talk to this a little bit later about how do we move to scale and ensure consistency in coaching practice. And so some of the things that we thought were really important for coaches to consider was that division context and those LEA objectives. And so they're both right there at the top of the coaching service delivery plan. And the other column that I found immensely beneficial is that there's a column that allows us to reflect on our own coaching preparation. So what are the things that I as a coach need to do in order to prepare to be able to support the, again, individual, school, or division that I'm supporting through this coaching work in the best possible way. And so having that there incorporates that into that service delivery plan and really begins to reflect back on what are the things we need to do to show up as our best selves in supporting coaching efforts. All right. And so again, we've incorporated just a couple of additional resources that relate to coaching processes around some of these models. Those links are there. We referenced earlier the Systems Coaching, a Model for Building Capacity document. That's where that table came from. Again, the Center on Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports has tons of resources. We showed you the NERN Coaching Service Delivery Plan as a resource that's available as well. All right. And again, here are some implementation blueprints, other fidelity resources that are available. The tips problem solving process link is there as well. All right. And so now I'd invite you all to go back to your note taker for just a minute and Reflect for about 90 seconds on which of these 4 considerations for addressing the current reality are reflected in your current process or practice, and which of these processes or practices are formal or informal for both yourself and whatever organization you're a part of in your coaching efforts. All right, Kim, if you want to go ahead and lead us into thinking about how to bring all of this to scale.
So thank you, Nick. Nick just asked a really important question that I often ask: what is formalized and what is not formalized? Because oftentimes we have a group of coaches doing great work, but we haven't operationally defined it, or we don't have formal processes in place. And so how can we be more intentional from the beginning when we're meeting? Like, how are we going to think about building this culture of coaching? You know, when you think about an organization of educators, you have a wealth of resources. And if we build this culture of coaching where it's not dependent on one, but all, the collective effort of all, then we've got just an abundance of resources to leverage and to be more intentional about how we use those. So very quickly, we're going to talk to just a couple of capacity building exercises or things that we include in our work, whether we've done this at the state, district, or school level. So when we talk about fluency building, oftentimes that looks like from the beginning, when I'm using a listening tour to listen to understand needs, resources available, who are the people who can engage in coaching and come along this journey with me? So those people, whether it's district level coaches, state level coaches have done this with me, or at the school level, we engage them in shadowing. So it's a bit like I do, we do, you do. And so we shadow, we collect data, we observe, we have dialogue to reflect on our practices, and we communicate that this is ongoing learning. And I think Nick, I've seen him do this, and I know I do it, is to model that I'm curious to know. I don't have all the answers. I have a brand new person who's shadowing me, and they have a brand new perspective that I can learn from. So we model that. Reflection protocols. We use a lot of things here, whether it's just a reflection on self, which Nick just talked to. I mentioned that my colleague Patty's on this call. We try to make it a practice to always go in at least 2, so that we have an opportunity to build ongoing learning, reflection, feedback. When we're thinking about efficiency of resources, if I'm working at a state or a district level, and I have a lot of schools that may be struggling with problem solving, for example, to be more efficient with our resources, we might do, as Nick said, leverage a professional learning community structure that's in place. And one of the things we found really efficient is to do a fishbowl. And we've done that virtually as well. So we have one team that we are coaching through a problem solving process, and others are observing, and we have a note taker, a protocol, right, for them to take notes on that. Capacity building, using data. So for example, when we're working with classroom behavior systems, we've got the practices, we've got data and systems, all of our circles to get to our outcomes. And part of our data is, let's go into this classroom, or let's sit in on this virtual classroom, and let's use that data collection sheet that we showed you from Northeast PBIS. And then let's talk about, what does your data look like? What did you discover? What did you see? Can we get close to agreement? Because we want to build that consistency. And many times Nick and I will enter in a coaching relationship, and they want support with the TOT, a trainer of the training, trainer of the trainers process. And I think what we've discovered is that can be a component of capacity building, but not the component. So we may have that, but we've got to build in fluency building, reflection protocols, etc. And we've got to create that culture of wellness and trust so that we can give performance feedback to one another in a safe way. And Susan Barrett uses language that I absolutely love: knowledge development efforts or sites. Some of us refer to model schools or demonstration, but I like the language knowledge development efforts, because that implies that we're learning together and that we may learn something from this particular school who does a great job with problem solving, and we may learn something from this school who does a wonderful job of aligning RP and PBIS. So really, these are some quick capacity building things that we incorporate. Nick, anything to add quickly to that?
Nope, I think you covered it.
And so we want to take this last poll, and I think we'll just use the chat real quick because I'm just being mindful of our time. But really thinking about moving from coaching as a noun to coaching as a noun and a verb, this culture of coaching. Think about how, operationally defining what it is that you do. How can you formalize those systems? A lot of us have informal. What are the tools and structures, like, for example, a problem-solving protocol, tips, if you will, that allows it to sustain? It really, if we build fluency around those routines and we anchor it to a structure, a protocol, then we might reduce that tendency to wave as we move through generations from self to others. And we use those things to shape our behaviors, check for ourselves, and have time, making the time for the trust building, the facilitated reflective coaching structures, which comes with building that culture of coaching. So out of those four, just quickly in the chat, is there one that you feel like we might lean into that? Or maybe we've got some informal things in place, but that's an area we could formalize and put some priority into that. Tools and structures. Okay. Facilitated reflective, shape behaviors. Tools and structures, shape behaviors, facilitated, yes. So great. I'm glad to see there's a diversity of responses there, that we are all able to identify what has meaning to us. Thank you for sharing those. Some quick resources. These are just some things. This coaching plan is actually in the file pod for you to access. So we do want you to, think about how your system is currently organized to scale coaching efforts. Sometimes that means who are all the coaches in our district or our state, and how can we align those efforts? Sometimes repurposing their roles and responsibilities. And just reminding us to, every day we know we have to renew and commit to ourselves. And I invite you to move past self-care as being selfish, if that's a space you occupy. And if that means using the word wellness, then do so, please. So we want you to think about any connections you're making to your work, to your heart, what's giving you energy. And as you're reflecting on that and, posting things, we're going to also take any additional questions, and we will show you the evaluation slide. But we hope that this short time has given you something to touch the work that you do in some way, knowing that we all have different contexts in which we're showing up to coach. We'd love to hear if there was one thing that really, wow, I connected to that either in my heart or my work, my mind, if you will. And so while we do that, just to give you our information, if you need anything, email Nick. No, I'm just kidding. Email both of us. We love to hear from you. We love this work. We're very passionate about it. Here is the QR code for the evaluation. And I think Patty and Karen, and I believe Kent, lots of people have been asking questions, but are there any other questions that we can answer for you?
Kim?
Yes.
This is Patty. There have been a lot of requests to be able to get access to the links. And so I volunteered you all to put those links on one doc, and Karen checked, and we can put those in the file tab after the session today. So people that want access to those links can go back. There is also a request, Nick, for the Wellness Wednesday. Is that something that you can share?
Yeah, so The division coordinator gave me permission to be able to share it as part of this, so I can upload those as well so that people can see those. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Anything else, Patty? We will put that resource together with all the links in a Word doc and upload that to the pod. All right. Final thoughts, Nick? You want to offer us any final thoughts from that magnificent brain of yours and your heart?
I really don't have any other than just thank you to everyone for participating today. One of the things that gives me energy all the time is to see others that are doing this work and that are equally inspired by it. And so being here, being able to kind of watch the chat as we went through today has given me energy. And so thank you to everyone that's been a part of this session and participated with Kim and I today. I appreciate it.
And I'm going to go ghost on you, Demi Moore. Ditto. I second that. So thank you all so much for joining us. We'll stay here for another minute or two if I'm looking at my clock. If there are any other questions, we'll just hang tight for a couple more minutes. And we thank you. Enjoy your evening or the rest of your morning or afternoon, wherever you are. It's 444, everyone. If you're still on, make a wish. So Nick, I will put the Word doc together with all the resources and the links, and then the Wellness Wednesday, we could pull that out onto a PDF just to post the visual to give people ideas to launch from, if you think.
Oh, well, so we could do it that way, or I have the actual PDFs because they have links in them. So the way that the actual PDFs were designed is some of them link to videos or other resources.
Okay.
And so if I just put those in our folder, can you upload them from there?
In the Google Drive?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll do it. I'm going to do that right now.
All right, then I'll go ahead and upload them.
Yeah, and Karen checked that you can use and I put that in the chat, that you can put documents in the file tab where all the other documents are.
Yeah.
After the presentation, you can still go in and do that.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
And that's where I put in the chat. That's where you would put that.
Okay. Great. You guys were awesome tending to things. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you all.
It's a great presentation.
It was fun. I'm surprised I didn't drive you to run off the trail, Nick. I looked at my meetings. I'm like, oh my gosh, how many Zoom meetings did we have?
We're still recording.
That's okay. They can clip it, hopefully. If you're still recording, we're going to sign off and say have a lovely day. How's that? Bye, everybody.
Bye.
I can stop it.
I don't think we can stop the recording. Oh, yeah, I guess
I can, but I don't
Oh,
know if you. I'm
it
not
just
sure.
pauses it. It doesn't stop it. I just paused it, but it's okay. I think it went really well. I love that presentation. It was wonderful.
Yeah, that's very much who both of them are. Like, that's their core. So I think it's why the delivery is so natural. And
It was great. It was great. All right. Well,
all right. Thanks for guidance. I couldn't get my screen to move down the chat. I don't know what happened.
the chat wasn't working. I was chatting, I was typing, and nothing was. It wasn't accepting. It wasn't sending my type. And so I finally ended up just refreshing. I was worried if I refreshed that it would like kick me out of the room. What would happen? And it it didn't. It just refreshed the Pathable page and then it would let me, but I couldn't, I was trying to type to people and I'm like, it's not working.
Yeah, I just couldn't get to the bottom, where the place that you can type is, it wouldn't scroll down. So I don't know what happened. That's why when I texted you, I'm like, where can I say something? All right, well, take care. Good to see you, kinda.
Bye.
Bye.